the kind of prominence that Scopia has achieved. The firm has had sculptures at the New York World's Fair in '65. Their sculptures reside at the Library of Congress, the Carnegie Institute, the New York National Academy of Design, Moscow College of Industrial and Applied Arts, and museums in Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Seattle, Dallas, on and on. I think it's of note that just recently the firm was the winner selected from among 65 firms from both North and South America that were invited for an international competition, and their firm was the winner of that particular competition for a piece of sculpture. In the September 1st, 1980 U.S. News and World Report, the firm of Scopia, with Saunders Schultz and Bill Severson, was mentioned in the same sentence with Louise Nevelson, who I'm sure most of you have also heard of, as notable examples of sculptors who have executed works for corporations in America. And the title in that particular magazine is Sculpture Carves Out Audience in the United States. Just this evening, Sandy mentioned that a forthcoming book written by Louis Redstone, FAIA, which is called Public Art, New Directions, will in fact feature 4 works of the Scopia firm. And this is a book that will in fact cover on a international scale new environmental sculptures. Without any further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sandy Schultz, who I don't only consider a great sculptor, but truly an environmental designer. Sandy? I prefer Woollen because I think it's better for the sound. Well, let's see, can I hold it? Push both of these at once? That'll work out, won't it? Well, you can do it either way. Yeah, you can put it down when you change. Okay. Good evening. I do want to talk about a sense of place, and in fact we're going to be with some of you for this evening and tomorrow and a good part of the next day, talking about this particular sense of place and talking about Ball State and Muncie and the environment, searching below the environment, but before I get into that sort of thing, I'd like to show you some of the sculpture that Bill Severson and I have created over a 20-year period. And I wanted to tell you, Tony was mentioning the firm Scopia. I think it's only fair to tell you that it's like the firm Taliesin. Scopia is the name of our studio in St. Louis. It's 30 miles west of the Arch. We have 5 acres and 2 buildings where we actually design and create sculpture, and where we have sort of created our own, you might say, approach to contemporary sculpture, to where you consider the context and to where you talk about a spatial thing and not a thing in space. And I think Ted Wolfe, the art critic of the Christian Science Monitor, in the April 1st edition this year, caught the approach and the context and what we're all about better than anyone I can think of. And what I'd like to do is show you some of these things and then talk for just a little bit and open up the discussion then to some questions and answers a little bit later. So if we may have can you all hear me? Okay. This slide over here is Padre Island. It's sort of existentialist slide. It's very hard to tell which is the sky and which is the earth. There was a storm coming up, and they were trying to copy each other. But I love to take slides, and the studio to my left is the studio that we've been talking about, Scopia. And in the upper left-hand corner is the building where we actually create the sculpture. And the one in the lower right-hand corner is our design studio. And then you see some loges going around the area. This is, Scopia is from the Greek derivative to take visual aim, like microscope and telescope. And there's lots more hot air where that came from. Then in the very lower corner, you can see a sort of a sunken garden done on many, many levels. Well, I'm going to say 7, as a piece of sculpture, a sort of photosynthetic sculpture. And I'll try to show you a picture of that a little bit later. We're very proud of this. We were one of approximately 20 artists who were asked to exhibit at Temple University last year. And Philip Berman, who's bought 56 Calders, he and his wife, and bought this from the exhibit and donated to the Morris Arboretum in Philadelphia. And they've decided to become a sculpture garden. And this is the first piece of sculpture that they have, so they put it in a very prominent location. It's corten steel, rusted, and we call it interspersed. It's very appropriate for an arboretum, especially one that I consider one of the most beautiful in the world. It's got running rivers in there and beautiful big trees and hills. But it speaks of an interwovenness, of a sort of a connectedness. This is a detail of it here on this side. These are 48 feet tall, and they're computer connectors, sort of connectors in the industry, but really Arthur Gould Odell, when he was head of the American Institute of Architects, challenged us and said, don't be afraid to stand up to the building. And so we created these towers, 48 feet tall, that had to stand up to the architecture, had to stand up to the lake. In fact, we even helped design the lake and the depth of the lake. We worked very closely with the landscape architects and the architects, so that there is a sort of a sense of oneness between the sculpture and the environment. And when I talk about a subject matter, the whole purpose of the subject matter is that when we first started talking to this client, they were really talking about a colonial building. I mean, that's how long and early on we started. The architect called us in at an early stage, and this is as far as we brought them. I mean, it was really Mr. Odell, but it's a sense of education. And especially when you know that they wanted a sort of a blue cross and a blue shield out there in the middle of the lake. And what we did, we studied the old building, and we found that they were using computers, and we found this computer connector chip, and we said, you're sort of connectors in the industry. And one of the board members, who was very intelligent, said, yes, but nobody will know that except a few of the people inside. And we said that's all that really have to know it, that on the outside to the world, it should just be a powerful piece of sculpture just standing there on its own and having a life of its own. Here's another picture of it on this side. And then the architects, Greenleaf Telescas, saw this and wanted something like it, and we did this for the trash transfer station in Miami. They're collecting trash and compacting it and building hills and valleys and landscaping it. So we call it negative to positive, the one on my left. We found these sculptural farms up in Canada, and the one on the left, you're looking at the Martin Luther King Memorial in Atlanta, Georgia. Those are 46 feet tall. They're also cortin, and it's beaten with a bronze tip hammer. There are two groups there, actually. When you start talking about context, you know, it works on many different levels. Here is a long, low building, and there's an old cemetery right above it and behind it. And they said, you've got to think about this. You can't do anything that's too gaudy. It would be out of place there. And there were two groups fighting each other at the time. One wanted to call it the Phoenix, after, I guess, Clark Gable and Gone with the Wind, at least rising from the flames. And another one wanting to call it the Martin Luther King Station. This is the Metropolitan Station. And they said the architects were the Eck Associates in Atlanta. And they said, well, you can wait to see who's going to win, or you can come up with a theme and please both groups. And the theme we came up with was aspirations, because you get under it and look up and you really get a sense of sort of rising, especially when you get down below and you look up 46 feet. You can walk through the middle of this, and then you can see the way it plays with the building. The trains sort of come by at the top, and there's a on the plans, they call it the kissy bye area, because this is where the husband or wife leaves their spouse off to go meet the Martin station. So it's a sort of a place marker. This is to show you how big it is. It's actually, that's about at least a 6-foot man there helping install it. And this is what it looks like. They had to water it down for the first 100 days so that this bronze from the hammer and all the various metals and cortin has a lot of copper, and it's a molecular structure so that when it rusts, it becomes a very beautiful thing. And if you throw a rock at it or whatever, it heals itself. And you can see the design on it, and you can see the way it's been beaten. And then you saw the last one, so that after it's rusted, it gets this very, very rich color, but you still get a sense of the idea that it was beaten and that it's dimensionalized. This is a detail of this piece here that is in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The building was designed by Eero Saarinen, and Glenn Paulson, who was a project architect, wrote us a beautiful letter and said he went back about 20 years later and felt it stood up against the test of time. Saarinen really helped us an awful lot, because he said there's a secret, and most architects and designers really don't care to know about it, but his secret was you do 100 sketches and you show the client one. And he said you don't count 100, and we don't necessarily show the client one. Many times we do. Many times we show them 2 or 3. But the idea of the search and the process are very important to both Bill Severson and myself. I don't know, this slide is evidently a bad one, but you can see the details. Saarinen did not believe in hanging up a painting or something. He wanted the whole wall to be the sculpture. So he had a very strong ceiling and a strong floor, and he personally picked a brick and wanted us to carve through. And we took the religious theme, Te Deum, people raising their hands in praise of God and carrying the food in the shape of a French bread. But
that was Concordia Senior College in Fort Wayne. It was a dining room. Over on this side, you can see the line in space, the bent line by the wind in space that Bill and I both love, the natural farms. And on this side, you can see a building that's 260 feet tall by 60 feet across, and it's a contemporary version of Michelangelo's God-Man touch, the perfect circle of God above and the imperfect circle of man below. And it's in St. Louis, and we said, what would be a good context for St. Louis? Well, the arch was already built, so we decided to take the Cantonary arch and to give it a different context, the context of sort of reaching up and reaching down with the possibility of the touch today. And we were on that wall for about 2 years. You know, sometimes the scaffolding would slip. Once it was vertical when I was on it. And once the wind caught it and start banging against the building. And this is one of those crazy things you do in your youth, maybe about 15 years ago, that I look at it today and I say, I wonder if that can't be done with lasers or computers or something else. But anyway, it was like our Mount Everest. You know, we did it because this is the way you build buildings today. And it was there. And we talked to the architects. It was Schwarz and Van Hofen and Hemney. And we said, it faces the arch. It's a few miles west of the arch. Why not stand up to it? Bill and I got up on scaffolding and drew this on the wall. And then the bricklayers came up and they put, they indented just about 3 places. And they put little strings, and then the tuck pointers came by and cleaned the wall. And no one told them. We had told their boss, and he had forgot to tell them to leave the strings in. So we had to go back on the scaffolding 260 feet up and find the little holes and redrew the drawing because it's done in solid brick. You know, all the other bricks have holes in the back of it. So we had to go back and find the drawing and then go ahead with the tuck pointers and begin to chisel this out. Yes?
We're going to hang it. I mean the back sometimes it doesn't get it. This may be a constant.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, that should.
All right. Now, I thought it would be kind of fun to show a few of the pieces that were derived from nature, are inspired by nature. And this we found sailing in the British Virgins, and I dove off in about 30 feet of water and pulled this conch up and photographed it and then threw it back. And this was what developed from one of those farms. Can you hear me better now? Okay, I'm sorry. This again is something that I created for the University Med School. It's called Med 2 in Little Rock. Nolan Blass was the architect. And they said to think about what a medical school should have, like microscopes and cells and all, and do something different. And it's very seldom that you get doctors and medical people thinking along those creative lines. So I wanted to do something very special, and I found an Italian, Mario Dell'Amico, who was born and raised in Carrara and who found 5 of these panels, 25 by 8.5 feet. And I took for the theme a sort of a life force, sort of a reverence for our life. And they're gross symbols. What happened, the architect had a basement, and he had his speakers coming down the basement, and he didn't want it to be a basement. So he opened the area with north light coming in, and then had a beautiful stairwell coming down to it. And this is one of the panels. This is Queen Anne's lace, or at least it was derived from a sketch that I did of Queen Anne's lace. Some years ago, Ralston Perina called us in and said, "Who are we?" And we thought it was kind of strange that they called an artist. We talked to some of the executives and many people in the corporation for years, maybe 2 years, coming up with just who they were, and we came up with the idea that they were a protein utilizer and resourcer. They had always worked with protein. Old man Danforth started the company by mixing feed for animals in his garage. He had gotten a college degree, I believe in engineering, and his father said, "Why don't you feed the horses and the farm animals, because they'll always be needed." And although they weren't always, technology took over, but he was very lucky because the whole pet food breakfast thing came through. So this I found across from our studio and took a photograph of it. We put this in an electron microscope, and these are the kind of things that came about. You can see how close it is. We looked for a discovery. We talked to their scientists, and we found that this was the first way that you could find protein. It's an X-ray diffraction of a protein molecule. If every one of these negatives were a positive, you'd have a protein. It's like a topo map. And Hal Dean, who was chairman of the board, said, "Prove it." So we borrowed the model, and we filled up the holes with a sort of a plastic and put them together, and he showed it to his microbiologist and said, "What is it?" And they said, "It's a protein." And he said, "You've done your homework." And that's how that happened. You've seen some big towers that we've done. There's a series of things that we've created. This one is in the biggest building in Oklahoma. It's Yamasaki's Bank of Oklahoma. It's done with poured and polished stainless. And you walk by it and you see yourself getting thick and thin, and it's just an awful lot of fun. They installed it and liked it so much in the main lobby, they decided in this area they weren't going to put any other furniture or plants or anything. We worked very closely with people in Yamasaki's office, and John Novak, who designed the O'Hara Field, and Glenn Monagle of Denver, the graphics designer. The one here is about 10 years old. It's in Pensacola, Florida. Tom Vincelet's the architect, and even then we knew energy would be a problem. So we did a fountain, and we brought the water up about 10 feet. Its own momentum brings it up about 24 feet, and then gravity pulls it down and shoots it over 60 feet away. So it bounces up and down, and you can walk under it without it touching. The one on the little model, I didn't know if you could see that too well or not, but it's close, and it's in the design stage for a museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, Clark, Treble, Harris, and Lee. And they put a team together, Tazio Makai, the museum specialist in Toronto, and Venturi and Rausch in Philadelphia, and the Larry Halpin Group, and ourselves. And this is designed with the geology of going from the mountains to the sea. It's going to be over 300 foot of carved brick, and then they'll divide it and use those elements in the inside of the museum. Our Mayan spirit here was done with the architect Chris Ramos. J.C. Penney was the client. It's in Colorado Springs, and they wanted a sort of Indian Mayan spirit to it, something very free. And so we actually took a sort of a Mayan symbol and put it up there against the Colorado sky. Now, you're looking at over 20 years of sculpture here. So naturally there's some different directions. You saw the big towers and the elements start turning through space. I found this down in Mexico, and it's lines in space creating other shapes. The Oriental sculptors have done it for many years. Bertaya has used it very successfully. And in this particular piece, this is the other side of Odell's beautiful building in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm sorry, not Charlotte, but Chapel Hill. You remember the blue towers on the other side? Well, these are 22 feet tall at the tallest, and there's vibrators underneath them. And they, again, wanted a blue cross and a blue shield. And what we did, we designed the bottom of it as a blue cross and a blue shield. And we had to get it approved by the national headquarters. So we, instead of sending a picture of the sculpture, we sent it to them in plan form, you know, the drawings. And to this day, they don't know what they approved. I don't think. Because you can see only when you look up or down directly, we put blue mirrors in the top. And only when you look down or up directly do you see that one's a blue cross and one's a blue shield. And even then you don't see it too well because it's constantly moving. But you get the sense that it changes during the day. It's a very powerful piece. And it speaks of having a lot of energy. You know, you're moving. Again, these lines in space, the piece that you see here is one in, the piece you see here is in Sangamon. The donor of the gal that gave the money was 85 years old and wanted a portrait of her husband. His name was Spaulding, and we studied the man's life and found that he invented a water purification system using a 52.5 degree angle. And we actually created a fountain out of it. By putting heavier rocks and lighter rocks in and pushing water through, he had clear water. And the students are very interested in the fact that 60, 65 years ago, somebody was worried about clear water. The model that you see over on this side is one of my favorites. It's actually built now, and it's at our studio. We did it for the City of Fountains Foundation in Kansas City, and it's about 20 feet tall. It's a rain thicket. What they're doing on 12th and Walnut in Kansas City, they're tearing down about 4 buildings. It was covered by concrete, digging up the concrete and putting in earth and trees and greenery again, which is a very rare thing for a city to do. So we spent a lot of time going around Kansas City, and we thought, wouldn't it be nice to bring back the feeling of the trees? And the lines sort of cross as you go by, and rooms sort of open and close, and it's a very aesthetic experience. It's also built on the same scientific theory as the theory that tore down the Tacoma, Washington Bridge. That is, when you have a farm standing like this and the wind hits it this way, the vortex is going to go around it and create it to move like this. And that's what tore down the bridge, and that's what actually makes this our perpetual motion machine. Because with any kind of movement at all, this different ones move almost constantly. This is in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's for the Radisson Hotel and the North Carolina National Bank. The architects are Thomas Vinculette of Atlanta and Guri Odell, and the interior designers are Howard Hirsch and Mike Bednar of California. And it had to be done in such a way that it's again I say it's a spatial thing, not a thing in space. It creates space around it. It creates space through it. And wherever you see it, day or night, on any angle of the compass, it had to be an exciting experience. It's bronze, and the most exciting place to view it, for my cup of tea, is right underneath it because it becomes a sunburst. George Hoover is the architect on this particular project. It's a Blue Cross Blue Shield project in Denver. And it captures the sunlight. It's just in the design state. And I'm trusting you tonight with a lot of things in the design state, things that have not been published. this would capture the sunlight 32 feet up and throw it 700 feet, come out, and this would be a sundial. These would be seats, this particular one, and then it would throw it through a ceremonial entrance into a 500-foot lobby, approximately 500 feet, and when the sun was out, each one of these farms would become a solar collector that would collect the sun and focus it into the next one, and it would light up actually a piece of sculpture in the back of the lobby that would light up 19 feet at the end of that lobby. Now, here's another shot of, you saw the model of the rain thicket, and this is actually the piece finished, and it does all kinds of marvelous things with water because we've had it operational. And this, of course, is the thicket that we tried. This is a northern thicket that we tried to sort of not copy, because Joe and I will not be talking about copying something. We're talking about capturing the spirit of it. We're talking about looking beyond and over and around the feeling of the thicket. But this is a fountain, and there's a marvelous amount of water just sort of coming out from one of the pieces. It covers the whole thing. And then it'll stop, and it's programmed so they never do the same thing for the same amount of time, so that any time you see it, it'll be doing different things. And then sometimes there'll be sort of abstractions of water sort of wafting toward the center, and sometimes they will mist up, and sometimes the water will play below and above. Sorry. Hold it a minute. Got carried away there. Okay. We were one of 25 sculptors that were asked to enter a competition for the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay, and we won first prize with this. It's called Communiversity. And they gave every sculptor the same theme, which was the connectedness between the university and the community, sort of a reaching together, and that's actually a fountain. We have a working model of that, and you can sit and have lunch. It's about 30 feet at least tall, or maybe 45 feet long, and you can sit and have lunch under this and not get wet, or at least that's the way the model works, and we hope the big one will work the same way. This is in a park out west, and that's Mount Evans behind it, and you're looking at a 6-foot model, although the 100-foot pool is finished. It's a 100-foot pool and a plinth, and it's we spent 2 days up on that mountain because originally 2 6-hour days, which was all I could take, and originally they wanted a family of mastodons, and we said, no, you're more than that. And we found this. It's the way you grow. It's the helical form of life. And it would be 115 feet long and 57 feet tall, and it would turn with about an 8-mile-an-hour wind. It would be a wind clock, sort of a wind vane. Now, this piece is one that I just installed in Short Hills, New Jersey. It was for Prudential and the Topman Company out of Detroit, the developers, in front of the B. Altman store. And they said they wanted something to speak of high fashion. And I said it does speak of high fashion. I didn't get this approved with Tony here, but I'm going to say it anyway. And they said, well, what's this got to do with high fashion? And I said, the title, it's called Cleavage. The one here is actually going to be built. It's built. It's going to be installed sometime, hopefully soon, in a plaza in downtown Winston-Salem. And the people from Winston-Salem loved a piece that you'll see soon called Synergism in St. Louis. And it's a cube. And we said, well, we wouldn't do a cube again. So they said, well, that one is a little over 20 feet tall and comes down to 6 inches. And if you can get this coming down to nothing, you can have the project. So we spent literally weeks with our engineers and their engineers, the architects, We've got it coming down to nothing, but what happens, there's a special kind of steel that goes all the way through it and then down at the back at an angle, and then the steps, there's granite steps that come up to it. And you have to walk up the steps and go like this to see that it's resting on a few inches. This is the piece of sculpture that we call synergism, and I keep talking about sculpture in context. Well, the building on the left is the one that was designed by Tom Vinculette in Atlanta, and we're working with him on another project right now for an electrical company down in Florida. But he was kind enough to say that he really loved his building as soon as he saw the sculpture in front of it. What he did, he worked the structure of the building on the outside so that you could look through these windows and see the city and the river. And every time we tried to fight the triangles, we lost because they were so strong. The minute we began to work with them, we got to a point where you know that there's this oneness between the building. And yet I show this at the same time because it's got to be obvious that if you're not a sculptor, you've got to quit and sell shoes or whatever. You know, it's got to work as a piece of sculpture. It's got to work aesthetically. And Charles Schweikhaeuser's had about 9 seminars. He's the environmentalist at Sangerman. And each time it gets the students about a minute to get to the word synergism. We gave a seminar at Tulsa University 2 years ago, Bill and I, and we were introduced by an actress who was doing all kinds of things, combing her hair and putting lipstick on and eating and climbing, and none of us knew exactly what she was up to until she said that it was all the things that she saw people doing at one lunch period, because they gather around it and it gives that corner, 7th and Washington and St. Louis, this special sense of place. I found this in Florida years ago, and again you begin to see how pieces of coral or leaves or anything can be the inspiration for a piece of sculpture. This is a very old idea and a very old sculpture. It's in the St. Louis Zoo. It's a Hagelin memorial, and Chris Hagelin was 12 years old and died suddenly of a brain tumor. And we went to his friends and classmates, and each one did a little something that they might find at the zoo. And we put it together as the Oriental ball within the ball within the ball, the symbol of everlasting life. And each child got his piece back. There were like close to 50 sculptors when this was dedicated. And we thought someday we'd like to do a city like this, where you'd invite everybody that wants to be involved to come in and work on the tesserae, the pieces you put together, so that someday they could bring their grandchildren back and say, I was part of something important. Washington University had a 100-year exhibit, alumni exhibit, and they invited 6 sculptors, and I was one of them. So I wanted the piece to be something very special. And I did this sort of reaching for the sun. And again, you can see how close it takes off. It has the feeling for it, the spirit of, but not necessarily copying nature. Here's another piece of, well, this is actually dogwood in winter. And what I tried to do here was capture the feeling of the dogwood. The negative shapes becomes the dogwood, and the positive becomes the ice. That's cast bronze. This is sort of Lincoln country, and here you can see the sand constantly moving with the shadow of Abraham Lincoln over to the right as it's facing, and sort of a Matisse-like Ozark stream. There was a glacier up in northern Canada that I particularly love, and I promised to show this tonight. It's this is our sunken garden, done on many levels as a piece of sculpture, and we call it photosynthetic. It changes in the seasons, and it's somewhere in the Never Never Land between sculpture and architecture and landscape architecture. Now, many times, we'll do things that are sort of engineering feats. The synergism piece that's 4.5 tons resting on 6 inches, that sort of thing. The piece that takes 200 gallons of water over your head and shoots it over 60 feet away, that sort of thing. And Tony asked me to show these two tonight because this one we just finished, and this one is one we're working on. And you're just looking at a wood model there, but it's a cross for the biggest cemetery in the country, Queen of Heaven's, right outside Chicago. It's a suburb of Chicago. And it will be polished stainless. And it's just a very fun kind of an experience. And we were very pleased that the Monsignor had enough vision to look at it and say, yes, it's beautiful, and because it's beautiful, it could be a cross or it could be anything else, but we ought to have it there. And this, Columbus, Ohio is not that far away. And I'd love for you to see this. It's a new Hyatt Regency there. Patrick Pringle of Columbus are the architects. We work with Gary Rutledge and Bob Davis of that firm. And Mike Bednar of Howard Hirsch, the same designers that did the Charlotte Radisson, did this. And what happens, you don't pull these out of stock. And that's kind of what scared me when you said, the firm. We just happen to be sculptors that create things in a space. And what happened, they had a big light wall. So we created these 20 feet long. This is a construction shot. And these are 20 feet long in places, and they fall down that wall with light above them. And then they come into darkness, and they fall over a pool with water and lights under it. And it's constantly having a slight movement to it. And then it goes up to darkness and sort of takes another bend and goes into a light well at the top, with the natural light coming through it. So you get this sense of a totally different experience no matter where you are in the area. Now again, this is one of my favorite pictures. I have boxes and boxes of slides that I change all the time. But I thought I'd show this because I know we're in automobile country, but we're also an agricultural country. And one of the things that Joan and I, one of the things that we will be working on will be, getting you to look at things with a different eye. And this is something that you probably see around here all the time. It's just a disc. But by eliminating the seat and the wheels, I've made you look at it in an entirely different way, in a sculptural way. And that's the end of the slides. If you turn on the light, I've got a few comments, and then we can open it to conversation. I don't know if I've taken too much time or not already. Okay. I thought I'd start out by saying, why me, and why Ball State, and why Muncie? For one of the reasons I might say that I'm here is that I was so spectacularly unsuccessful about close to 25 years ago that I'm not a Jasper milquetoast. I'm not, scared of anything. And I thought after 25 years I'd come back to Muncie and try again. But I was called in by a bank downtown that was working, and their biggest client was the Ball Glass Company. And I met some of the executives, and I saw the glass, and I realized that, that more jars were going out all over the world than any other place. But anyway, I think they decided not to do anything. I don't know that I lost it to another sculptor. But that's the last time I was in Muncie, and I'm sure it must have been 20 years ago. So I got to thinking about Muncie, and I happen to think that Indiana is an extremely exciting place to be. I happen to love the piece, even though it's 20 years old or so, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, that we did with Sirenen. And there's some other just great architecture being done in Fort Worth, Indiana. And there's Madison, Indiana, where they're completely renovating their downtown area, and people are beginning to talk about it all over the country. And there's New Harmony, which is one of my, I just love the piece that they call it the Roofless Church, that Philip Johnson and Lipschitz did. I don't like the sculpture, but the two pieces work together so beautifully that you know you're in a sacred place. And there's very few places like that in the country. And then there's this grand and splendid Richard Meyer building that he just finished a year or so ago that I happen to think of very highly. I know a lot of architects think of it as an exercise in stairs, but I think it's a pretty exciting building as you walk around it. And I could go on and on about Indiana. But then, driving up here, we looked at the tour guide that AAA sends out. And they talk about Muncie, Indiana. And they talk about Cyrus Dallin. It's a piece of sculpture. The appeal to the Great Spirit, and that's here in Muncie, Indiana. And they speak of it as being on the campsite of the original Muncie Indians, who were a very important part of the Delaware tribe. And I did a little bit more research, and I found that that the Muncie tribe their symbol was a wolf, which is a magnificent animal, and that there were three of these appeals to the appeals to the Great Spirit. One of them is in Washington, D.C., and if they've never needed an appeal to the Great Spirit, I would say it would be right now. But anyway, what do you do with a piece of sculpture like that? Do you avoid it? Do you ignore it? Do you go on from there? When you're thinking of a city like this, the lens in 1927 had the whole country talking about Muncie when they did the book Middletown. And then they went back in around 1930 and did Middletown Revisited, because it is like Middletown, USA. And do we think about that? Do we think about the Middletown approach? Muncie, we could go on and on about all the things that have something to do with Muncie. And I prefer to think that we would take Cyrus's challenge and say, okay, an appeal to the Great Spirit. Possibly the Great Spirit is still around. And possibly we ought to challenge each other to come up with a new spirit and say, okay, these other cities have done some pretty fine things, and now it's time for Muncie to do some pretty fine things and to appeal to the spirits, the great spirits within us and without us. And let's see who we are and who Ball State is and who Muncie is. So there's my challenge to you. And when I started out this few minutes, I said, why me and why Ball State and why Muncie? And the obvious answer is, why not me and why not Ball State and why not Muncie? Thank you. Now I thought we could go for some formal or informal questions and answers, and then, of course, we can talk later on at the party. But would any of you like to start any discussions here? Anyone upstairs? Yes. Could you stand up so we can all hear you? Okay, that's a very good question. The question was, how did I get started? And how did I get my first piece sold? Well, I'll tell you how I got started. My mother called me Saunders. And I asked her one day, I said, well, why did you call me Saunders? And she said, well, I knew that by calling you Saunders, you wouldn't be a street cleaner or something like that, you know? So I think one of the first things I reached for was a chisel or a brush. And how did I get started? That's a very good question, and it deserves more than just a witty answer. I knew that if I ever did anything else but sculpture and painting and things in a big way, you know, my family would starve and I'd starve because it's who I am. And I knew that when I was, I hate to admit it, but I'm going to admit it, I'm 53 years old. I'm a young 53. And when I was 15, I designed and created the etched glass for the Austin National Bank in Austin, Texas. And I did the Talkhorn Hotel in Marshalltown, Iowa when I was 15 going on 16. And I did these things going through school because I knew that my dad didn't have a lot of money. And I had a sister and I knew we had to get her through college. So that if I was going to do these things, I'd have to do them on my own. And how I got started, I would just knock on a lot of doors, you know. It's not a very romantic approach, but it's how you get started. It's by saying, gee, I really want to do this. And I didn't have a car at first, and I would hitchhike, and they'd say, what is that? And I'd say, well, this is my box of tools. And they'd say, well, what do you do? And they'd say, oh, I've got a friend that's got this Italian restaurant. Why don't you go see him? And my wife will tell you, I did that for several years, and when we finally could afford a car, I said, how am I going to get work? And the other thing is just knocking on doors. You know, I'd call up architects, I'd call up landscape architects, call up anybody. I'd look in a paper and see that there was a new building going on, and I'd call the architect and say, how about, you know, considering sculpture? And it took an awful lot of that for a lot of struggling years to get to do the bigger things. Any other questions? Yes, Tom.
I got one, Sandy. It was interesting. You said that Klein started that their image was a colonial headquarters and wound up obvious with a building and a piece of sculpture that is anything but of a colonial genre. Do you find clients responsive or willing to be educated if you take them through a process?
You do now. When you first start out, did you all hear Tony's question? Okay, I've got the mic, so I'll repeat it. He said, you know, he was interested in the client who started out thinking colonial and ended up thinking very contemporary. And I think you've got to make up your mind, you know, what you're going to do, because this can be an age where we're going to be in a terribly competitive field. I mean, you know, if you're going to be an engineer or a landscape architect, or an architect or a designer, there are a million landscape architects. You can't go to any city without, you know, and go into any area or school where you won't run into a landscape architect. So what you've got to do is, first of all, decide who you are. You know, if somebody calls you up and you're an architect and they said, I heard Frank Lloyd Wright talk, and once somebody got up and said, well, what if somebody asked you to do a colonial gas station? And he said, son, nobody would ever ask Frank Lloyd Wright to do a colonial gas station. Well, you know, when you're first starting out, somebody's going to ask you to do a colonial gas station. And if you say yes, and it's really nice, they're going to ask you to do another one, and then another one, and pretty soon, that's how you end up your life. So what you've got to decide is, you've got to look in the mirror really hard and say, okay, who am I? You know, what do I stand for? Forget the environment at first, because you've got to start right here, your liver, or wherever you're going to start, and decide who you're going to do and who you're going to be and what you want to do, and the fact that you are different than anyone else, and find out what that is. It's going to take a lot of work. And then once you do that, and you decide what you want to do, then you've got to decide that if you're going to be competitive today, you know you can do two things. You can be a hack, and you can make some kind of money. Not a lot, but you'll always have money coming in. Or you can really go after something different. You know, you can really say, okay, this is what I want to do. No matter what it is, this is my goal. And with me, it was architectural sculpture. It was sculpture of the environment. And I just didn't listen to anything else. I mean, you put blinders on. And so you do the same thing with a client. At first, they'll say, but shouldn't you do this? And you act deaf and dumb and blind, and you listen to them, and you try their way, and you come back and you say, but isn't this a little bit better? And you sort of go by stages. You fall back a little bit. And then as you get better known, then you can begin to see slides, show slides, and pictures of your successes. Never show slides of your failures. We've all had them. You know, Picasso has failures. Frank Lloyd Wright has had many failures. But show the best things that you know you're capable of. And then pretty soon you get to a point where the clients see this and they say, well, if McDonnell Douglas and so forth, you know, if Denver and Atlanta and Kansas City feel this way, I guess it's okay for us. So that as you grow older and more sure of yourself, you get a lot more leeway and freedom with the client. But at first you really have to fight for it. Does that answer your question? That's it. Yes.
You have a consistent approach to design or strategy and problem solving. You're trying to decide what kind of sculpture should go in the setting.
The question was, do I have a consistent approach in designing a problem for a particular setting? And it's an excellent question. And I think I could say the only thing consistent about me is my inconsistency. But that's not true either. I had a marvelous teacher by the name of Fred Conway that used to say there ain't no rules. And I think that's important, you know, to know that there ain't no rules, and yet there are certain rules. You know, it's kind of a funny sort of thing. The first rule is you've got to really work hard to get your basics. You've got to have your basics down so well, your design, your engineering, your math, everything down so well that you can forget about it. You can step on it, you know, you can kill it. But you don't do that unless you really have your basics down. And then one of the things that I do, one of the things that Bill does, we'll come up with just little clay ideas or little plastic ideas or sketches. And we'll get to something where we consider it, you know, like pink, yellow, red hot, orange, red hot, pink. I mean, orange, whatever the colors we choose. And if it's a red hot pink, then we know, if we both think so, you know, then we know we should develop that with more models and designs. And then we'll call in the engineers and the architect and the landscape architect and the engineers. And we'll, first of all, you know, we work with not a harness, but a direction that you get by studying the givens. And Tony and I, Tony, you know, had a marvelous approach to this when we worked in Indianapolis. You know, I mean, he really had a mind that began to pick out the givens in that particular instance. And so that you start out by saying, you know, what is doable and what is possible. Because if you come out and somebody calls you in and they've got a job for $25,000 and you say, I've got this great idea and we've got to build it a mile high, we've got to do it in cast bronze and so forth, they'll kick you out. So first of all, you've got to have the givens. Is it a water fountain? Is it in front of a 27-story building? Is it in front of a home? Does it have the Rocky Mountains as a background? Is it going to be sitting on grass? Where is the location? Wouldn't you like to do something different for Muncie than you would for Kokomo, Indiana? And then you begin to develop a theme and a farm together. Really, you sort of develop models, and we do usually rough models of the space. So you begin to get a sense of the space and the place, and then how these things fit. You put little models of people around, and then finally you get the feeling that this is it. It's like Brigham Young. This is the place. This is the way. Does that answer? Does it? Okay. Yes. You want to get so we can all hear you?
What do you feel about the combination of IMK?
Of what?
IMK and more, how they work together a lot.
What do I think of the combination of IMK and Henry Moore and how they work together? I think you can have two great spirits and not have a synthesis, not have a synergism. And I think that's what happens when these two get together. It happens all the time. It's not just those two. Philip Johnson mentioned a few months back that every city has to have the obligatory calder. You got to put a calder in someplace. And Pei and Moore are really great, designers in their own right. I mean, I.M. Pei did the environmental building in, it's outside of Boulder, isn't that where it is, in Colorado? And it just sort of grows out of the rocks, and it has such a feeling of being there. And Henry Moore, well, I mean, he's Henry Moore. He's done such beautiful things, but I haven't seen them work together too well. I think the piece in front of the museum in Washington works very well, but I've seen them do a great big I.M. Pei with a little tiny Henry Moore. I think that was in Baltimore. But they've done a lot of that sort of thing, and they just don't fit. It takes more than two great men to do architectural sculpture. You've got to sit down and you've got to work these things out from the very beginning, and one can't sit in one country and one can't sit in another country and hope that they'll work. Does that answer that? Well, tell me, because I want every question answered, because...
What I was thinking was
Okay.
that the particular style that they work together so often, it seems as though maybe one might design around the other. Pei may design a building knowing that Henry Moore put a sculpture in front of it. And it seems maybe he has the parameters set up that he can put in his contrast because he knows the style.
No, in fact, I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm sorry. Okay.
The fact that a lot of times Pei may design a building, you know that Moore will put a sculpture in front of it, and one of them may design around the other one. Pei designing a building knowing that the sculpture, or curvilinear type of thing, may blend. He may set up this contrast purposefully. And what do you think about that idea? Or else the sculptor, knowing that you probably get a very rectilinear type of building.
Okay, the question was, for instance, I.M. Pei will design a building sometimes around Henry Moore, knowing that the curvilinear Moore might be in front of the rectilinear building. And sometimes that works very well, and sometimes it doesn't. I almost have the same answer I gave you before. I think that there's only one way of doing architectural sculpture, And I mean, it's my belief that you've got to sit down with the architect, with the landscape architect, with the engineer from the very beginning, and even at a point the client, and sort of all work together. And when you don't do it that way, sometimes it works very well and sometimes it doesn't work very well. For instance, you're close enough to Chicago that you've probably all seen that city. And they think all you got to do is go out and get a Picasso. And so the building was finished and the mayor decided where the Picasso should go. And it works because it happens to be a marvelous image. It has a sense of place. But it doesn't work from every angle, and it doesn't work too well against that building. But when you think of Chicago now, you think of the Picasso, so it really works. The architects that had the Chagall put in front of it in Chicago, the maquette got lost going to Chagall, and he called and asked for another one, and there was a architectural student that sent him the block of the space he was going to have. He designed for that block, so it really doesn't fit the building very well, and it really isn't architectural. The same thing, the bat. I can't believe that Klaus Oldenburg sat down, probably never met the architect. The Calder, I know some of the people in Mises' old office, and the building was finished, and they had to take out some trees and put in some, it was an afterthought. And of all the things in Chicago, I believe that one works the best, because it's light, it's red, it works against the black building, and you can see, it's like our big towers in Atlanta. You can see the city through it and get some very interesting works. So my answer to you is, it can work very well, but it's like taking pot luck. You know, sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't. I'm not saying that my approach is the only approach. I'm just saying that that's not the way to go as far as I'm concerned.